What up, everybody, and welcome to Baz on Blades. My name is Baz, and I talk about blades. Today, we're going to go over Baz on Blades bathtub blade cleaning guide. And this is something I've always done, since I've been into knives, when I get a new knife. I got two knives that came in today that I'm going to review for the channel. And one of them, this Ganzo Firebird 7603, the new FB 7603, the ball bearing G-lock, axis lock model. It feels like it has a mixture of sand, gravel, pocket lint, and baking soda in the pivot. It is extremely dirty from manufacturers, the manufacturing process. I'm assuming these are not assembled in a clean room. At their price point, they're probably not. And if you've ever worked with steel before in manufacturing, everything is covered in oil and it holds dust. And there's just an incredible amount of dust in the air in any manufacturing facility. So the pivot on this thing is full of crap. The second knife I have, just got this in, the Best Tech Swordfish. Oh man, I'm super excited about this knife. Took it out of the box. Everything is fantastic. It feels great. It's pretty clean, but still what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean it. Now you can see here I'm in the bathtub or next to the bathtub. And the reason is I get a high flow of water with a decent amount of water pressure. I've got plenty of area to work here, and I'm not going to make any messes or anything. This is a pretty straightforward process, guys. I'm assuming that most people do this. I do not disassemble new knives to clean them. Very, very seldom do you actually need to disassemble a knife. If I get a knife that I've got such an issue with that I need to disassemble it from the get-go, I'm probably going to return that knife and get another example. It's just too much of a hassle to me. As far as the Ganzo Firebird goes, we're talking about a $20 knife. You know what? If it's not right, I'm just going to get another one. As far as the Best Tech goes, everything about this knife looks and feels fabulous. I just want to clean it up and see how it is with, all the manufacturer's grit out of it. So, the only thing you need is a good steady stream of hot water. You want to be able to cut the manufacturer's oil and grit out of the pivot without disassembling the knife. Like I say, very seldom do I ever disassemble a knife to do anything like this. So what I'm going to do, we're going to go straight hot water. Alright, I want to get as much water pressure as I can. I'm going to go straight onto the pivot, down through the knife here. This is the direction I want the water flow. I want it to flow through the pivot. And I'm going to wash away everything that's in that pivot, the oil and grit that's in that pivot. Alright, so I'm going to go straight into the water. Just going to let that hot water hit straight through that pivot. Alright, straight through the pivot, get the inside, out, that's hot. And I do have this straight hot water, guys. This is not warm water. And we're trying to flush that pivot out. We're going to flip it, flush it from the other direction. Alright. Get this knife wet, and what I've got here is just a bar of hand soap. This is Ivory. It's antibacterial. It is the winter time. I don't want my knives to catch a cold. So I'm going to use some antibacterial soap. I'm going to use a soft bristle brush. And then I'm just going to go over this knife from one end to the other, all exterior surfaces. We're going to clean all of this grit off of it. All the manufacturer's dust. Very few knives are cleaned before they're shipped out, especially at a $20 price point. I want to get down in all the nooks and crannies, down into the sockets of all the hardware, the screws and whatnot, up under the pocket clip, down into the G-lock, axis lock area. Get down into the knife here. Just force the bristles of your brush down into the interior of the knife. Get both sides of the blade. Again, we're using a mild hand soak. Now, the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go to the pivot end, and I'm going to get the bristles of my brush down into that knife around that pivot. And I want to clean all of that I can up here around the stop pin. Can go in this direction. We'll open that knife up a little bit, rotate it around, clean as much as we can down in there. Now, keep in mind, we're going to clean all of the factory oil out of this pivot for the most part. And majority of the dirt, you can see this brush right here. I hope you can, I don't know if that's showing up, but it's really, really dirty, guys. To my eyes, it looks fairly brown. I'm just going to go over all these surfaces. I got to be careful with this knife. My hand's covered with soap and it's wet, and this knife is on a bearing pivot, and it is free fall guillotine smooth, guys, and pretty sharp. You know, not crazy sharp from the factory, but sharp enough to where it failed, it cut me pretty bad. All right, now I've got all the surfaces. To rinse this off, I'm going to go to some warm water I can actually stand to put my hands in without burning them. All right. We're going to rinse everything out, get that soap off of it. Sort of brush that soap off, anything that's stuck on it down in any crevices or anything. Alright. We'll come back to the pivot side here. Get around that stop pin and the pivot. Alright. Now, once again, I'm going to flow this hot water. Go back to straight hot water. I'm going to flow that hot water, as much water pressure as I can get. And I'm going to flow that hot water through the pivot. Alright, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come under here and I'm going to work it a little bit with that pivot under the water and rotate those bearings in this instance. You know, if it's on bushings or washers, then you can do that. And I can feel the difference. You know, there's no lubricant left in that pivot for the most part. That's extremely hot water. I don't have any kids that are going to burn themselves, so I've got my hot water turned up pretty high as far as temperature goes. And we've got this thing cleaned pretty good, guys. Let's see here. That's pretty decent action right there for a Ganzo Firebird. Ah, dadgummit, that water's hot. All right. Shake excess water out of it. We're going to take it, towel dry it. Now this is, you know, this is in 440 stainless, this Ganzo is, so I'm not too worried about it being wet for just a little bit. After I clean these, what I do is I go to one of my floor vents in the house and put that on it, and then turn the fan for my heat pump on to flow water through it. But I don't use my heat pump in the wintertime. It's old, and I don't want a $400 electric bill in my house in the wintertime. So I've got those vents closed off. Now we're going to go to the Best Tech here. Again, let's flow some hot water through the pivot. That's all we're doing right there. That shit is hot. It's hot, guys. Cold water doesn't do crap. You got to use hot water. Don't burn yourself. You take that. All right, turn that off for just a second so we're not wasting hot water. And just like the Ganzo, we're going to go over all the exterior surface of the knife with just hand soap. Again, like I say, I'm just using Dial hand soap. The same thing that I use to shower with. Get down in the hardware, in the sockets on the hardware, and up under the pocket clip. And that's a good thing about using a toothbrush. I can actually clean every bit of the surface up under that pocket clip. I can get the bristles up there, up under it real good. I can get the bristles down into the recesses of the knife. Here in the lanyard hole, I can get bristles down in it. It's really, really easy to clean a knife with a toothbrush. All right, again, let's close this thing down. And this knife, guys, oh, I can't wait to do the review on this Best Tech Swordfish. It's attractive. The fit and finish, I've not seen any issues with it so far. It's extremely smooth out of the box. Very well centered. Early lockup. This one looks like it's going to be a pleasure. Those are the best kinds. You want a positive relationship with your new knife straight out of the box. You don't want to get it out of the box and then be like, ah, crap, it's not centered, it's not smooth, I'm going to have to work on this thing. You know, what's up with it? Am I going to have to adjust the pivot? Am I going to have to... And not that those things are a big deal for the most part. Most people that are into knives are handy enough to where the common tuning your knife is not a big issue. But not all people are willing to disassemble or start adjusting on a knife. They may not have the knowledge. They may not have the tools. They may not be the type of person that likes to do that. All right. Get around here. Yeah. This is a beautiful design, guys. I love this swordfish design. It's not the first of the Best Tech G10 models that have been through my hands. But I think it's overall my favorite design of these. I really like the scimitar. And I need to get a Warwolf. I want to try the Warwolf out. I love that profile. And I think it's a slightly smaller knife, like a 3 1/4 inch blade, where the scimitar was 3.6 or 3.75. And then this one is about 3.9, almost 4 inches. All right. Well, I think we've done good enough there. Let's turn the water back on. Get some warm water going here, guys. And we will flush all this soap out of this knife. See how it looks and how it feels. Now, sometimes you'll get an extremely dirty knife. You may find on the lower end of knives, maybe like that Ganzo I just cleaned up, that it might be so dirty that you want to go over it with the soap twice. But for the sake of time on the camera, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to make this into a super long video. I mean, it's not that big of a deal. But I see a lot of people, less experienced collectors, and they get knives in and they're just super frustrated because their knife that they were so excited about came in and it feels like crap. And admittingly, a lot of knives come from the factory feeling like crap. You know, I don't want to give these manufacturers a super hard time, but just like anything else that is mass produced, things get by. And it's not feasible in a knife that costs $20, $30, $50 to hand clean these knives like this before they leave the factory. Typically what a manufacturer will do is use compressed air. They've got a compressor set up and they can force air through it and they're going to blow the dust off and wipe it down, and then they're going to oil it. And speaking of which, these Best Tech knives, they come from the factory covered in oil. There's no doubt about them. They're not going to rust in transit. I'm going to tell you that right now. They actually come covered in oil. No big deal. I mean, I would rather a manufacturer cover it in oil and I have to clean it than for them not to put oil. It's shipped from overseas and arrive with rust on it. You got to keep in mind, this Best Tech is in D2 tool steel, which is not stainless steel. It is semi-stainless. Now, D2 is not like a straight carbon steel. It's not going to rust. It's just not going to run away and rust. But it will potentially rust, especially if it's coming from overseas and it's around any salt water at all. D2 is not stainless enough to resist salt water. It will rust. All right, now I'm rotating this to rotate these bearings under this water, under this hot water, and I can feel the difference. I can feel that the oil, the factory oil and stuff is out of there. And I can also feel that it does not feel gritty anymore. So, I think we are good to go on this knife. God, what a beautiful knife. This one is awesome, guys. This one is awesome. All right. So, we'll shake out the excess water there. Grab our towel. Since this is a tool steel, it is not stainless. We're going to get the majority of the water off of it. And now what we need to do is dry these knives. Since they have not been disassembled, the drying process needs to be thorough. And by what I mean by that is, if you think it's dry, it's not. Okay? You don't dry it till you think it's dry, because there is water down in the pivot. And no matter if it's bushings or bearings or anything, there are multiple surfaces that are going to hold water. If through no other process than surface tension, water is going to cling to those surfaces. You are in an enclosed area, very little airflow to it. So what you need to do is you need to force air through it. And like I say, I typically would take these to my floor vent for my heat and air and turn on the fan and blow air through them and let them sit there for a half an hour. But what I'm going to do with these, I'm going to use my fan. So we're going to go from here. We're not going to pause this. Actually, maybe we will pause this so you don't have to see me walking through the house and setting the fan up, which I did not do before the video. So I'm going to pause this right now. We're going to go to another room. We're going to go to my fan. We're going to force air through these. And we'll do that probably for an hour because it is not as direct an air source as I like. So we'll go to that next. Alright guys, we're back. We're here in another room of the house, and I want you to look over here real quick. You see this? That is a sheet covering up my shop equipment for my knife making. That is my grinder, my drill press, metal cutting bandsaw. Up underneath I've got a big box. It's full of material, steel and handle material and whatnot. I've got a box here of supplies that I'm building up. That's abrasives. I just got some safety equipment in from the last knife sale that I had. So I got new respirator and cartridges for it, and face shield, and some good American-made cobalt alloy drill bits that will last a fair amount of time drilling through steel. All right, so what we're going to do, we're going to take these two knives that we just cleaned, and we've got to get them thoroughly dry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set them up right here in front of this fan, and you can see I'm going to have the fan blowing directly on these. I've got them laid where the fan can blow directly through the knife, and we're going to dry these knives. Now, I've got that on high. I want as much air under as much force as I can get going through those knives. And you may ask me right now, why are you not using your compressor? Well, I have a small compressor, and my compressor, it's fairly oily. Like most small compressors, I don't have a water separator on it for condensation, and I don't have any filtering on it. So it gets a little bit of blow through of oil and water. And I don't want to blow that through a freshly cleaned knife. I want a clean, dry air source. So we'll leave these two knives right here, where typically I would go for a half an hour. We may go a half an hour to an hour on these, and see what we can come up with, get them dry, and we will come right back to this. Alright guys, we are back. We've given these knives a little time to dry out. I left them in front of the fan for about an hour. Got them dried out. The Ganzo, I've already lubed the pivot on it to save a little time. And we're going to work on the Bestech Swordfish. Now, a couple of things. When you clean a knife like this that has G10 on it, you're going to strip all of the oil off of the G10, and you're going to end up sort of with a dull look on it. You can see the black here. It's not real black, and the orange is sort of dull. So what we need to do is re-oil that G10, and what I use is Tough Glide. I love Tough Glide. I've used it for, God, I don't even know, 20 years I've used Tough Glide. It's a liquid lubricant that has an evaporative base. It's probably mineral spirits or something like that, and it leaves behind a dry lubricant. So what we're going to do, I put a little bit on a cotton ball. It doesn't take much. We're just going to quickly rub down this G10 all the way around and around the edges and blah, blah, blah. Just leave a coating of that on there. And we don't have to worry about rubbing this off like oil because it's a dry lubricant. It's going to dry out. It's not going to leave any liquid behind. For those of you that are not familiar with Tough Glide, you should get some. You can get a small bottle for $10 or $12. One of these little needle applicator bottles, and it will last you literally for years. And I mean, unless you use a crazy amount of it. I've had bottles that last me for 2 or 3 years. It's not the best thing for lubricating a pivot. I do prefer a regular oil for lubricating a pivot, and what I'm using right now is what am I using right now? I am using Break Free oil. It's just a little micro oil lubricant, and it works very well. Again, a little tube like that lasts for a long time because it doesn't take much oil to oil a pivot. Alright, get this G10 wiped all the way around so it looks nice and pretty. And there we go on that. Now you can see the color is much richer now, and I mean, it looks really good, guys. So we have washed all of the factory dirt and lubricant out of that pivot. We did it with hot water and with soap. So we need to come back and lubricate this pivot, and this is what I do. What I want to do is look down in the pivot. I want to find the closest point I can to the bushings or bearings that's down in this pivot. Whatever around the tang of the blade, whatever is the closest point to that bearing surface, whether it is bearings or phosphor bronze bushings or nylon bushings, Teflon bushings, whatever. And then I'm going to take my needle applicator to that point on each side, and I'm going to flood that side. Alright? Now, when I say flood, I don't mean a gallon of oil. I just mean just to flood the surface of that bearing area. And it doesn't take much, just a couple of drops will do that. Now, that's going to be excess oil. And I'm working that around those bearings, and you can feel it. I can feel already it has totally come around the surface of those bearings. So, Now what I'm going to do, after I've flooded that pivot with oil, and I've worked that oil around real good, I am going to wick the excess oil out, and it's really easy to do. What I do is I take some toilet paper, a couple of sheets of toilet paper, and I fold it up into a square so I can get some layers going, 6 or 8 layers, and then I form a little sharp ridge in the center of it. And what I'm going to do is I just set that down. I'm going to take my knife pivot edge down and put it right on that ridge, where the ridge enters up into the frame up against the pivot. So you want this ridge to be bent tall enough to where it's going to force up inside of the frame physically against the pivot. And it doesn't matter where it touches it at all. And what that will do is it will surface wick the oil, the excess oil out of that pivot. So you just set it in there, force that up in there. You just leave it leaning up against something where it stands straight up. Alright, this is going to be difficult on me. Alright, so I need something to lean it up against. We'll take my little kit here that I've got all my knife stuff in, and go right here, and we will just leave that leaning up. And I've already oiled this Ganzo. Look at that, FB 760, guys. Bearing pivot. Not the smoothest set of bearings. It's single row steel bearings. I can feel them turning, but this knife is totally free. I mean, it's totally free. You will cut the shit out of yourself with this if you don't keep your fingers out of the way. It will guillotine and get your fingers almost instantly. And I'm going to get that, set that knife up in there and lean it up so it'll wick the excess oil out of it. Alright, guys, and that's pretty much it. That's all you need to do in order to clean up a new knife. Now, like I say, I typically do this. It doesn't always have to be done. I have gotten knives that were very, very clean from the factory. They didn't need anything done to them at all. But typically a knife can stand a light cleaning like this, and then you'll have to re-lube it. Be sure after you clean it to dry it thoroughly. If you think that it's going to take a half an hour over forced air to dry it, do it for an hour. If you think it'll take an hour, do it for 2 hours. I just dried these for an hour. I dried it for 30 minutes, went in there and checked it, turned the knife a little bit where the air would hit it differently, let it go for another half an hour, and the pivot was completely dry. And that is extremely, extremely important. You do not want standing water in your pivot, because even if all the components are stainless or ceramic or anything like that, water in your pivot will draw dust. Any liquid in your pivot, the oil that I just put in the pivot on these, will draw dust if you're working in an extremely dusty environment. You do not want water in there, of course, because of corrosion, especially like on the Best Tech that's in D2, which is not a stainless steel. Once I wick the excess oil out of these, I will go back with the Tough Glide, and I'll go over all the surfaces that were dried out and don't have any oil on them. And then I'll do a coating of Tough Glide on the blades. Let that dry. It dries in just a few minutes. It evaporates off, and it leaves behind a dry lubricant film. So there you go, guys. This is what I typically do with every knife. I hope this helps you out. There's nothing difficult to it. It takes a little bit of time to do it the right way, but our knives are worth that time. And once I carry these a couple of days, I'll know whether I'm going to have to adjust on the pivot. Both of these, the Best Tech, the blade centering was perfect, no play. The blade centering is just a hair off on the Ganzo, but there's no blade play in it. So I may play with the pivot on it and see if it'll pull that centering in, but it's not bad enough at all. or it's not bad at all, I say. It is just a hair off from center. But in a couple of days of carrying, I'll know what each of these knives need, if they need any further adjustment or attention. I hope this helped you guys out. I know it seems pretty rudimentary, pretty simple, but you would be amazed. There's a lot of people, they don't know these things, and they're the ones that need our help. And that's part of what I do on this channel. So as always, thank you guys very much for taking the time to watch this video. God bless all of you, and we will talk to you again.